So my name is Miranda Tremere. I'm with Food and Water Watch. And
Dan Finkus, Organizing Director, Long Island Progressive Coalition.
Dennis Dunn, CWA Local 1108, Local Political Action Team.
I'm Lisa Oldendorp. I'm the Long Island Regional Organizer for MoveOn.org, and I'm also a member of the Global TPP team. I guess we've been on this for about 2 to 3 years. I've been on weekly phone calls.
Yeah. Well, once again, I'm Dennis Dunn. I'm part of CWA Local 1108, which is Communication Workers of America, and we're a union that represents communication workers, nurses, various other, but for the most part, telecommunications, Verizon workers are the vast majority of the membership we represent here in Suffolk County. So I was asked to speak. The hard part about the TPP, not to step on anybody else's toes, is to only talk about one specific thing. It touches on such a variety of interest or our lifestyles. I don't want to be exclusatory, or anybody can find something that will upset them about this bill. I guarantee you, if you leave this room, please wait for me outside and tell me that there's not something specific that would touch your life or you feel would hurt your future or your children's future or step on your sovereignty, your U.S. nationalism. So I'm going to focus on the labor, though, after I just spent 2 minutes not focusing on the labor, because that's where I come from. But it's not just specific labor that I'm worried about. It's all these aspects: environment, ISDS, sovereignty, all that stuff. So the three major factors that the TPP affects as far as labor is loss of U.S. jobs, lower U.S. wages, and erosion of workers' rights. Whether you're a pro-union person or not, all of these things will affect workers. When labor's doing well, when I say labor, I don't just mean union. I mean every working citizen in the United States. I really do. And so I'm not specific to organized labor when I talk about these things. Bad trade deals have led to massive trade deficits, which have led to massive job loss. I mean, if you're exporting more or you're importing more than you're exporting, those jobs go where the imports are, where the exported jobs are, and that's in other countries. This has happened with NAFTA. I mean, everybody's probably pretty familiar with NAFTA. You know, we've had a $500 billion deficit since the big trade deals have started. NAFTA, CAFTA, which is the central. Does anybody not know what NAFTA is? Because NAFTA, excellent. NAFTA is a North American Free Trade Agreement. It was signed in '93. It was pushed by President Clinton. It was supposed to create 5 million jobs in 2 years or 6 years, something like that, and it lost, what's the number? I have the number here. I mean, it's a 700,000 job loss to this point. So a lot of the things you'll hear in the news now with the TPP, the people that are pushing this, is they're saying they're beating the same old drum. We're going to create jobs. We're going to create jobs. Where these jobs are going or coming from, I have no idea, because every single trade agreement we've done, CAFTA is the Central American Free Trade Agreement. We signed a deal with Korea. It's called Chorus. It's a U.S. free trade agreement just in 2012. That was supposed to generate 60,000 jobs. We've lost 70,000 already. It's 2015. And when we talk about these job loss, there's different industries that are affected. As a total, I'll give you a bigger number. You know, I'm not a big numbers guy, but I did my homework today to look at these numbers. 3.4 million jobs have been lost since NAFTA out of this country. And I'll break it down for you. I don't know it by heart, so I'm gonna cheat and look at my notes here. 700,000 IT, HR, finance, and purchasing jobs. That's just since 2002. 375,000 additional jobs in those same departments, IT, HR, finance, are projected to be lost by 2016, if the TPP should go through, I should say. So we're not expected to lose that unless this Trans-Pacific Partnership does go through. There's a question. We didn't even ask if you knew what the TPP is. Is everybody aware what the TPP is? The Trans-Pacific Partnership. It's a trade agreement with 12 Pacific Rim countries. Canada, Mexico, Malaysia, Australia, Japan, that's a big one, right? Vietnam, I'm going to touch on Vietnam in a minute and how that will erode workers' rights in our country. 200 U.S. call center jobs from 2006 to 2012 have been lost. Now that specifically has hit our members. We've had call center jobs we've been hemorrhaging them for years right now. Our membership has gone down from about 1,700 members to we're just over 800 members now. And a lot of that is call center work. So when you press 1 for English and you get an Asian or an Indian speaking guy, that's because it's not in this country. No offense to Asian or Indian speaking people, but you're not getting that. You're not getting a U.S. labor person talking to you. It's so easy to flip the switch.
You're speaking local numbers. You just mentioned the losses, 17 to 800. That's just the
Yes, that's just my local. That's just local CWA,
that's just
1108.
That's just the county.
That's just Suffolk County. Yeah, we had 1,800 members. Now we now have 834. One of you guys help me out? Roughly around there. Yeah. So that's the job loss. So when a lot of these things, when you say, it really doesn't affect us, these numbers, they do. They do. Call center jobs is good work. Operators that we've had, I could speak specifically for our local. We used to have a call center in Riverhead. We had a dispatch, Southampton, Patchogue, and Port Jeff. They're all closed. And Oakdale, okay. Yeah, all closed. Every single one of them now. They're all up west. They're either in Massapequa or Garden City or upstate or not. And now that's with organized labor where we have a collective bargaining agreement where those jobs are protected. So think about people who don't have collective bargaining agreements where it's even easier to move them out. We'll just send the jobs out, wherever. So that's why when you talk about labor, when organized labor is affected, all of labor is affected. Public sector jobs, which usually are sometimes safe, they won't be safe with the TPP because Made in America rules will be out the window. It'll open up procurement contracts within the country. Our tax dollars have to go back into Made in America or public sector workers. Okay, the TPP eliminates that from happening. You can't discriminate against the other TPP countries. So picture, here's an image I've said to a lot of my guys. Picture an American soldier on foreign soil in USA, wearing a USA flag, dying for whatever, our rights, or for whatever reason, but on the back of the tag it says Made in Vietnam. Doesn't that drive you crazy? It makes me sick. But that's a possibility if the TPP should become. And that's the crazy part. So we're kind of extrapolating numbers based on other agreements and this and leaked chapters, right? Because nobody can see it. Senators can see it, but they can't record it. They can't write about it, and they can't talk about it. But President Obama's telling you it's not a secret right now. That sounds like a secret to me. Yeah. Yeah.
5 years, right?
Yes. I've heard 5 and 4, right? Yeah. Well, who knows? Because it's a secret. We're not going to tell you.
Are you saying it's supposed to remain a secret after it's in effect?
After it's signed.
Yes.
4 years, 4 years.
4 years.
So we're not even allowed to know what laws we're operating under anymore?
Right.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's weird.
Yes. And wait till Lisa starts with the ISDS and that sovereignty stuff. It's going to blow your mind. It's not going to make any sense. I got the easy part. I got labors. I got numbers. That's the.
Is anybody talking about treason?
I
mean, it sounds like treason.
I think so.
Yeah.
You can talk about it all you want.
Yeah,
I won't
exactly.
stop you.
I feel like we got a whole discussion afterwards.
Yeah, that's a whole. Wages, U.S. wages in this country. How do you compete when the average hourly wages in Mexico are $2.66 an hour? That's pretty bad, right? Vietnam's $1.05. $1.05. Minimum wage in Vietnam is 52 cents an hour. So when you're competing on that, it's only going to bring us down, whether you're organized labor or Joe Schmo labor or business owner.
Can I jump in there too? Because I think one of the other things that gets sort of thrown around, in addition to like we're going to get jobs out of this, we're also going to, like small businesses can put their exports out, right? Except that is another thing that really kind of hasn't happened under these other trade deals, in part because labor costs are cheaper elsewhere. It's cheaper to produce goods elsewhere because of that. So
I mean, that'll take me right into the workers' rights, and this is where it's more specific to union. Since NAFTA's come around, threats to plants closing and when workers organize have climbed from 27% to 57%. So in other words, if you wanted to organize or get better working conditions, safe working conditions, benefits, they'll threaten to leave. They used to do it 27%. Now that they have these free trade deals, they threaten at 57% to coerce you into not organizing, or they'll just move, and there's no repercussion anymore. Plants closed during union elections went from 2% to 15%. So it's easier to just move on, and then the American worker gets left behind. Now, whether you're in a labor union or not, when labor unions do well, other workers do well. They ride the coattails, and everybody succeeds. And that's really what this is about, American jobs. So, I mean, I would like to touch on Vietnam, if that's right. If I'm getting long-winded, cut me off, Dan. I mean,
I'm not.
yeah, Vietnam traffics in child labor. Okay, I'm going to say it again. They traffic in child labor. That's what we're about to do business with. Okay, and they also make 52 cents an hour. Why do you think they make 52 cents an hour? Because they have child labor. 80% of factories violate safety requirements. These are international safety requirements. These aren't even U.S. standard safety requirements, which are better than some other countries. Violent suppression of workers' rights. Like if you had said, this isn't right, they'll beat you, kill you. They won't let you talk about it. You're not allowed to do that stuff there. And exceeding work hours and inadequate wages. The U.S. Department of Labor found a lot of these allegations in a study 2 years ago to be accurate and true, and they recommended to never ever get to a trade agreement with them. But yet we're still forging ahead. So the bottom line is, on labor, it took a lot of time to write this down. You ready for this magical sentence? We don't need another trade agreement that provides incentives for corporations to pad their profits by offshoring our jobs, reducing our wages, and eroding our rights. Instead, we need a fair trade agreement that benefits all Americans. Thank you.
My name's Miranda Tremere. I'm with Food and Water Watch. I'm going to talk to you guys a bit about environmental stuff and some food safety things, although I actually see Jane Fasulo, who's over here, from the Sierra Club Long Island, and we talked to her a bit about speaking on some of the environmental issues, and if you wouldn't mind doing that, I'd love to have you do that, if you want to.
I'm with the Sierra Club. I'm the group chair for the Long Island group. Hey, Nancy, hi. Nancy happens to be working with us on a bag campaign. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Sierra Club, it comes from the name Sierra Nevada Mountains. Started with John Muir. If you're not familiar with him, you should read about him. He's a great man. He began a private hiking club, which in their process linked up with the University of California, became an educational outdoor experience sort of an organization, which it is to this day. We're a local division. We're the third level down. We're chartered both from the national to the state, then down to us, the local group. We are all volunteer, but we keep our eyes and ears on just about everything going on. So it's a busy life, but amongst those things that I'm busy with is part of this Trans-Pacific Partnership and fast trade agreements. You get quite an education when you start doing a little bit of research because you look at both sides. You want to be independent thinking. You don't want to lean in one direction versus the other. But there's unequivocally information out there that you can't deny about trade agreements. One of those things, for example, is, are any of you familiar with the XL pipeline? Most of you are. Well, this is tar sands oil coming from Canada through the United States to go to ports in Texas to be exported from the United States. Well, under the North Atlantic Trade Agreement, which was Canada was included as part with the United States, this is typically what happens. Canada can come into our country and do business here, and once they get approval to do business here, if their processes interfere with our, I should rephrase that, if our laws, our regulations, particularly environmental laws, clean water, clean air, if somehow they interfere with those companies, those corporations making a profit here, they go to what's called a tribunal, which is nothing more than a court made up of the corporations that are part of the agreements. It is that tribunal, having no people representation, having no government representation, that makes a decision whether or not those laws interfered with the profit making. Not whether they were good laws or bad laws, but did they interfere with the profit making? And if so, that tribunal not only says you guys shouldn't have interfered with this company, but they can actually adjust the amount that we owe them. And you may not be aware of it, but the United States now has a lawsuit out against it from the Canadian oil companies for trillions of dollars, because we will not allow the XL pipeline to come through. And they've told the president, if you do not let us pass this line through, expect us to sue you. The sad thing is they're not suing the companies here in the United States, they're suing you, they're suing me, they're suing our government for interfering. So we're paying that bill. And it goes to every environmental law we've ever set up, whether it's Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, no matter which one it is. Here on Long Island, we have protections, we think, about our water and our water issues, such as drinking water. If a company came in here and wanted to use our drinking water to bottle, and it's a foreign company, and they were given approval to come into the United States because they're part of this trade agreement, could buy our clean water. We have no say. I mean, we have a say, but if we try to do anything, we have to pay for it.
You say it goes to court, but I thought it goes to arbitration, which is not.
No, it does not. It goes to a tribunal.
And I think-
And that has nothing, there's no recourse.
That's
and I
correct.
think that
know about it.
Lisa's
That's
gonna
right.
actually talk
Lisa's
a bit
gonna
more
talk
about
yeah.
about the like
And I don't
specific
wanna steal her
mechanisms
thunder,
of that.
but I think
No, but you
what I
kind
have
of
to say
can't
is-
without talking
Right,
about
what I
the
have to
environmental
say is
thing.
that thunder really affects the environment wholeheartedly, and we here on Long Island are so critical in our environment. Everything we do here, we're downwind from anything that goes on, like methane releases of gas fracking. We're downwind from coal plants in New Jersey. We're downwind from the nuclear reactors that are upstate and across the water in Connecticut. We're really prone to a lot of environmental damage. It's bad enough that we have to fight our own companies, but now we might have to fight foreign companies, and our win is that we have to pay them.
We can't fight.
That's the.
Oh no, we can try, but if we do, then we have to pay them. That's the sad issue. If we try to stop them, if we try to invoke our laws, we have to pay them. There's something upside down about that. Now, I can't speak for the Trans-Pacific Partnership specifically because, as they said, it's a secret document. We really don't know what's in there. We can only model off what the trade agreements have done in the past. And as many of you know, there have been trade agreements in Mexico that have also hurt the American public. So I'm not happy about hearing another major trade agreement with 12 countries involved. It's probably one of the largest ones that's ever been done out there. And I send the floor.
No, and I think the thing to really like underline, and Lisa will talk more about the investor state stuff, but when it comes to the environmental stuff, they're going to talk about the environmental, what's in the environmental chapter. They're going to, tout all the new sort of regulations and mechanisms that they have. That may or may not be true. The leaked chapters that we've seen so far are fairly vague and don't have good sort of enforcement mechanisms for whatever regulations they're talking about. But regardless of that, no matter how good it is, this investor state stuff undermines it. So just like be keeping that in mind when you're hearing debate on this stuff, there's that. There's one last piece I wanted to add about the environmental stuff, which is like kind of not along that. It's a pretty specific example. But so we are in a moment of serious climate change. We need to cut back on fossil fuels really drastically. So Japan is one of the largest importers of natural gas, or it is the largest importer of natural gas in the world. So one thing that very specifically could conceivably be happening under the TPP is that there will be more incentive for U.S. companies to be producing more, fracking more. And as with right now there's momentum. The anti-fracking movement here has had a lot of momentum and has won some gains, as in this state, for instance. But we're looking at a situation in which it might become that much more lucrative to be, sending gas overseas.
And in that regard, there is permission able to be given for drilling in the offshore continental shelf for both oil and gas.
That just happened.
It's coming very close, in addition to which there's the LNG port being planned for off the area south of Long Island and east of New Jersey. They're getting a permit on that LNG facility, or requesting a permit on the basis of importing gas. The thing is, it's very much easier to get a permit to do importing than it is to do exporting. The critical issue being, we need the energy, which is, trust me, it's not true. But the change from having an import facility to an export facility does not require a new environmental impact statement. So once they get the permit, they can switch it over to an export with some investment. It does cost money to do that, but it profits them more. And they make it easier for them essentially to get an export facility. Yeah.
Marin said that they would have to go through the whole thing all over again. However, they now have vessels. Ho has a vessel that regasifies, that's for import, and gasifies for export. So actually, there won't be that much of a change.
That's correct, which is why they don't need
And also, I've been going to Colombia, and the new shtick is we want a one-price world commodity. So what, since we won't have manufacturing jobs, what are we going to be exporting to close the trade gap? It will be our natural resources, our food, and our patents, you know. These are the things. And that's why it's so scary.
This is actually, that's sort of a perfect transition, because a couple of the other things I wanted to hit on was food safety stuff, which also shades into environmental stuff. So another thing I've been hearing in the sort of like talk as Obama is talking and everyone is talking about why this is a good idea. You know, there's a little bit of this language of we'll bring up labor standards and safety regulations. We'll be bringing up the standards of our member countries by going into these trade deals with them. You know, again, we can't predict the future. We can't say this hasn't happened in past trade deals. Usually the way it works in, you know, sort of working to streamline trade is that there's like this system where people can claim equivalency of standards that doesn't actually get inspected, that doesn't actually happen. So if we're talking about food safety, we could be then taking in imports of stuff that is treated with pesticides that are banned here, with antibiotics that are banned here. So Food and Water Watch, the group that I've been working with, has specifically been concerned about fish, and fish is like a big thing in many of the countries. That this is one of the major imports we'd be getting. So we already have trouble dealing with our imports of fish. We only inspect, does anyone want to guess what percentage of fish we inspect that's coming in? 2%. 2%, yes. And I mean, so, and just to give like, so in Europe, the EU inspects 40 to 50%. So like, we're already doing pretty bad on this stuff. So we inspect 2% right now. One of the kind of leaked things that's happened around this deal is that we've heard that food companies have been pushing to have a provision where they could challenge inspectors' decision to inspect something as it's coming over the border. So just to make it that much harder. And, you know, whatever they talk about, slowing down trade, barriers to trade, whatever. So, yes. Food regulations, that's a really serious thing. Another thing, you brought up the patent stuff, and there's an there's a intellectual property chapter. That has also been leaked. One of the big things to talk, there's a lot of things to talk about in there. And again, but one of the things I'd really like to sort of bring up tonight and underline is stuff with generic medicines. So one of the things that this would do is extend patents on medicines for, is it to 20 years now or
20,
something? Yeah. 20 years before it can be a generic. And so, I mean, let's just think about like cancer drugs, AIDS drugs, you know.
Or cost of drugs when there's no generic option.
Yes, exactly.
You can't. A lot of people don't get the drugs until it's a generic option.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, we already have.
affordable.
It was.
And it's retroactive too. I don't mean to step
It's
on it.
retroactive.
It's
Oh, that I
retroactive
didn't
too.
even know.
So like
How long is it now?
5 years.
5, okay,
5 years.
thank you.
So.
But he's saying it's retroactive.
Right, it's retroactive. So let's say Levitra is like a cholesterol medicine that came out, let's say 6 years ago, okay? And they passed the TPP. That 20-year intellectual property law would kick in, and it would go retroactive back 20 years. So Levitra, let's say you're getting it at the generic, whatever that is, would go back to being, you'd have to get Levitra, and would be 4 or 5 times more the cost of the bill.
Yeah.
Are you sensing a theme here? It's really just a very few multinational corporations and banks that make out from this, not the average person.
And that's another thing I want to just step in. I feel like my role here is turning out like, so that one of the things I've also been hearing in the course of this debate, in the pushback from pro TPP folks, is that labor's going to have a seat at the table, and environment, what's all this talk about it being secret? This thing has been being negotiated for years.
On the corporate thing, there are hundreds of trade advisors as part of this deal, and it's a process to get it. But the people who are applying to become trade advisors have the money to send lawyers to be trade advisors are the big corporations. So labor may get a seat at the table. Let's say a labor union has the resources and sends one lawyer to go sit at the table with 500 corporate lawyers as they negotiate with these other countries, and then we might have a seat at the table, but it's a really big table, right? Really big table. So, and I think that's with Monsanto getting 15 or 20 or 40 trade advisors, and we've got one. So I just want to, and we don't even have one at this point, as far as I know.
To segue off Monsanto a minute, and not to kill the labor thing, but they're touching it. There's no mechanism for enforcing any of this anyway. So they can put whatever labor a chapter they want in there or environmental chapter, but there's no enforcement mechanism.
And the ISDS
so that's
stuff undercuts
right.
it.
So, and right. Now ISDS undercuts everything, but that's that. We'll get to that in a second. But so there's no real enforcement. This was supposed to bring up the working standards at NAFTA with Mexico, and what has it done? It's actually driven Mexican people across the border coming up here because they're getting abducted and murdered and raped every single day in these manufacturing areas. I mean, just think about that. It's not raising the level. So you'll hear that. Well, other countries will come up. They're not coming up. It's just dragging us down. And the same thing with the on the environment. It's not raising the environmental standards elsewhere. It's just going to try and drag the environmental standards down.
Well, everything that was polluting has moved south. Mexico is an environmental disaster. Anything they would be regulated here, the manufacturing has moved all overseas. That's the reason all reclamation and recycling is done in China, because they have no laws.
It's interesting to talk to the people of Costa Rica, where I was this winter. They have Dole pineapple came down, and they're happy because they have jobs, but their mindset is one of their real base of their economy depends upon their natural, physical butterflies, birds, bees, bats, whatever you want to call them, their rivers. And when Dole comes in, they're using the water and turning land. I was in the dry forest side this winter. It's supposed to be dry. It's supposed to be forested. It's supposed to have this character that it burns off. Well, with the Dole plantations there, they're watering. They're keeping everything green and lush. It has disrupted the environment to the extent that the tourism has suffered because of it. And they're not happy. They're really not happy. So when you look at what happens when we go into another country, we're not making friends. We could be making enemies. It's about the environment when people really want to protect something, and we may be stepping on their toes as well.
I'm going to talk about the investor-state dispute settlement. That's the formal name for the court. And this right here is the leaked chapter. I started to read it, but I gave up. You really need to be a lawyer to understand it. So I have depended on Public Citizen Global Trade Watch to translate it for me. First, I'll talk about the investor-state dispute settlement, which I'll call ISDS, and then later I'll talk about Fast Track Authority. The ISDS sets up this court system, a foreign tribunal, to settle disputes between corporations and countries. Similar courts have been in the past under recent trade agreements, but the TPP gives corporations expanded powers, much greater than they had before under the old trade agreements. Previously, a corporation would have to convince its government to sue the government of the country that they wanted to sue. So it was government to government. But under the TPP agreement, the corporation can sue the government directly. And when they get awarded compensations in the court, it's the citizens of that country who are on the hook to pay these lawsuits. I just also want to say, I'm going to get to that. Yeah. Since CAFTA, NAFTA, the World Trade Agreement, and similar agreements, the number of lawsuits has greatly increased. On the back table, I left a graph here. This is in 1987, the number of lawsuits. This was 2013, and they're increasing every day. So under TPP, it's only going to get worse. It's not going to get better.
that a chart of lawsuits our country has against other countries or lawsuits?
No, this is lawsuits in general among all countries. Some of them are fracking, Lone Pine versus Canada, minimum wage, Veola, the bus company, or versus Egypt. Public health was Philip Morris versus Australia, Philip Morris versus Uruguay about cigarettes and tobacco. Coal regulations, a Swedish company is suing Germany because Germany decided to get rid of their nuclear power plants, and the Swedish energy company said, oh, no, you don't, we're suing you. In mining, the Pacific Rim Company is suing El Salvador, toxic controls, Ethel versus Canada, and then there's another one, Myers versus Canada. Pollution cleanup, a big one I'll talk about a little bit later, is Chevron versus Ecuador. And then Renco versus Peru, Metalclad versus Mexico. And in agriculture, you have Cargill Foods suing Mexico, Eastern Sugar against the Czech Republic. So U.S. Trade Representative Michael Froman and President Obama have been really misrepresenting the implications of this investor-state dispute settlement. They're saying that the TPP provisions are similar to the U.S. constitutional standards, but in fact they are quite different. ISDS only allows foreign corporations to directly sue a country before an ISDS tribunal. They're demanding tax dollars to compensate for loss of expected future profits due to a country's labor, environmental, health, safety, land use, and even zoning laws. So even little towns, counties, we're not safe under TPP. If LNG wants to come in and do the port and stick the line right through East Rockaway and Long Beach, if under TPP, maybe they could. ISDS provides foreign firms alone the rights and privileges that are not available to domestic firms under U.S. law. Only foreign corporations are empowered to claim that domestic policies created by Congress, state or local legislators, and upheld by domestic courts violate their special investor rights and privileges that are granted under the ISDS agreements. Domestic corporations do not have the privilege of suing their own government. And for example, Lone Pine, oh, this is interesting. Lone Pine, a Canadian energy company, wanted to sue Canada because Quebec passed a moratorium on fracking, but they couldn't sue their own government. So what they did was they went down to Delaware and they incorporated themselves in Delaware. And then they sued under the NAFTA agreement for $250 million. And at that time, Lone Pine was in bankruptcy. Isn't that an easy way to get out of bankruptcy? And the case still hasn't been settled. It's a very, very complicated case. These ISDS tribunals allow corporations to supersede domestic courts. And here's where you get into kind of that unconstitutionality, possible treason issue. An example of this is the Ecuador versus Chevron case. It's been pending for over 21 years. An Ecuadorian court ordered Chevron to pay Ecuador $8 billion reparation for ruining their water, their soil, and forest with oil contamination. Under the U.S.-Ecuador trade agreement, Chevron went to an international trade court, similar to ISDS, that overruled the Ecuadorian court. Chevron sued Ecuador for $9.5 billion, little Ecuador. And the complicated case still hasn't been settled. So these are the kinds of things that we're talking about. I mean, corporations having a zillion lawyers, keeping these cases tied up for years and years. When we say there's no enforcement, there really is no enforcement because they just tie everything up and until finally the company says, all right, you win. Forget it, I'll change the law.
Is that under NAFTA?
That was under the U.S. Ecuadorian trade
Treaty.
agreement. Thank you, treaty. Under ISDS, unlike domestic courts, all judgments are final and there's no possibility of appeal. So, under U.S. courts, we have some remedies, but under these tribunals, we don't. Then we have to look at, well, who are the judges? You get 3 corporate lawyers, and they're drawn from a pool of corporate lawyers who are corporate lawyers for these corporations that are being sued. They rotate between suing governments for corporations and being judges. Each side chooses a judge that they like, and then a third judge is chosen that both sides approve of. And they typically have a pro-corporate bias rather. So, it is nothing like our domestic courts. When asked if ISDS undermines U.S. sovereignty, giving companies the right to challenge U.S. laws or to weaken labor or environmental standard, the U.S. Trade Representative Michael Froman said no. He claims that the states retain the right to impose any measure they wish, and it can't be changed by arbitration. But here's the catch. This is the fact. A government may have to pay hundreds of millions of dollars to a foreign investor that objects to their policies. Examples are the Swedish firm that is suing Germany over the nuclear power plants. Philip Morris is suing Australia for billions of dollars over a tobacco regulation. The mere filing of an ISDS case chills the establishment of a policy, or it leads to a rollback by the country as part of the settlement. So while in a way, Froman was technically right, the ISDS cannot change domestic laws, but the filing of a case has the effect of discouraging or rolling back the regulations, which would protect the health and welfare of the citizens of the country. Another point, under the TPP agreement, this one I hate, all countries must conform their laws to the terms of the agreement or risk being sued in the ISDS tribunal. So in effect, you have corporate trade representatives making the laws for countries. Okay? We have 600 corporate advisors making these trade agreements, and the countries have to make their laws go to fit the agreement. So the laws that our legislators are making for us can be undermined by ISDS, no matter what the president says and Michael Froman says. Finally, when asked if the use of ISDS is on the rise, the U.S. Trade Representative said, not under U.S. agreements. But in fact, the number of ISDS brought under all U.S. free trade agreements, I'm not sure which trade agreements he was talking about, but according to Public Citizens Global Trade Watch, the U.S. free trade agreements cases have been rising from 3 to 3.5 to 4 per year, which is not a lot. However, that doesn't include the ISDS claims where arbitration never began or where the case was withdrawn. But globally, around the world, the number of cases has been surging. In the first 3 decades of ISDS, there were no more than 50 total. So in 30 years, there were 50 cases. From 2011 to 2013, at least 50 cases per year have been launched. So, and a recent UN report also concludes that the share of cases against developed countries has also been on the rise. The U.S. Trade Representative also bragged that the United States has never lost a case, which so far is true. But there's always a first time, and a second time, and a third time. And what about the developing countries who are being sued by the multinational corporations? How do they survive these lawsuits? I mean, I I try to think globally. I think of myself as a citizen of the world, just not the United States. What are we doing to these countries? And what are these transnational corporations doing to these little developing countries? Go ahead.
In Australia, Philip Morris sued Australia for changing their packaging on their cigarettes. You know, like we have the Surgeon General warning. Theirs was a little more graphic, but they won. I think that was a record-breaking case. They won 300 billion million. I'm sorry, 300 million. Or 500.
I don't
It
have
was
it.
It was a crazy amount of money. Let's just say that, right? And then they went and did the same thing in Uruguay, because Uruguay, that's basically all they did is smoke cigarettes and barely get by in life. So they put these drastic pictures on the cigarettes to try and discourage kids from smoking, which is their right. That's their country, right? We wouldn't want someone telling us what to do in our country. And Philip Morris sued them for so much money. It was more than their gross domestic product than they can make. So that they couldn't win, because they couldn't even fight the lawyers. That their fees would have just been astronomical. They got rid of it. They put the plain packaging on and caved in because they had no choice.
These and other reasons are why TPP is called a corporate coup d'etat. It gives foreign corporations higher powers than national, state, and even local laws. In all practicality, it undermines the sovereignty of nations by allowing all of their laws to be challenged in an outside court with no possibility of appeal. So to me, that's undermining sovereignty. I'll go on to Trade Promotion Authority. The bill that was looked at today was the Bipartisan Congressional Trade Priorities and Accountability Act of 2015, otherwise known as Fast Track or TPA, Trade Promotion Authority. Fast Track, I'll just briefly give a definition. It's a mechanism by which Congress gives their constitutional power over trade to the President. Under Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, Congress has exclusive authority to regulate commerce between nations. So Fast Track, basically, if you ask me, but nobody did, is an undemocratic process. First used by President Nixon in 1973, and it hands much of this authority to the executive branch. The elements that Fast Track gives away to the President, the U.S. Trade Representative Michael Froman, and 600 corporate advisors, actually I think it was 607, something like that, are the power to select trade partners, the power to set the terms of the agreement, the power to fix the text of the agreement before Congress votes on them, and that was a little change in this law, the power to write legislation that changes existing U.S. laws, the power to circumvent ordinary committee review. Then the legislation is submitted directly for mandatory expedited vote, gives them the power to override congressional leaders' control of the House and Senate floor schedules. It gives them the power to override normal voting procedures. There is a ban on all amendments. Can be no amendments unless all 12 countries agree. The time for congressional review of the trade agreement is curtailed to 60 days in the House and 90 days in the Senate, even though it has taken over 5 years to get this agreement. So proponents say that the new bill would establish, the new trade promotion bill, would establish for the first time in law the text of a completed trade agreement, that it must be public for at least 60 days before the President may sign it. Okay, that's the new part of the bill. I'll say that again. The text of the completed trade agreement must be public for at least 60 days before the President may sign it. But in reality, thanks to Public Citizen, a close read of this provision, Section 6A, number 1, reveals that the requirement to make the text publicly available would occur 30 days after the agreement was initialed and the text locked, at which point it would be too late for the public or Congress to demand any changes. So when they say, oh, well, the public is going to look at it before the President signs it, that's true, but once he initials it, nothing can be changed.
So even without fast track, the 60 days that supposedly Congress has to look at and 90 days for the Senate, and then they take a vote?
No.
With fast track.
Without fast track, they would have as much time as any other bill that they wanted to look at
I'm
and
saying separate,
amend.
I'm just talking about, can Congress vote this down, is what I'm saying.
Oh, after they've looked at it for 60 or 90 days? Yes.
Yes.
They could, so then that's when the work is really gonna start.
No.
No.
The work starts
Now.
right now.
No, no.
No.
Just
So,
not fast
so,
tracking is
so
happening.
we can talk a little bit about, Lisa, do you have more? Do you need?
Yeah, just a little bit,
Okay.
not much. Okay, so in short, fast-track legislation allows the provisions of the TPP and other trade pacts to be set by the executive branch before the public ever gets to look at it and review what's been proposed. It then rushes through Congress, circumvents ordinary review, amendment, and debate procedures, so it basically eliminates our time-honored system of checks and balances. We have no way of any real input to this.
Right.
Proponents say that fast track is needed, and we hear this all the time. We need fast track to push these trade agreements through Congress because it's such a giant thing. But that's not true, because since fast track began under President Nixon in 1973, it's only been used 16 times, and over 500 trade agreements have gone through without fast track. So it's only been used for the worst trade agreements.
And we pay them to do it.
Absolutely, we pay
We
them.
elect them to represent us.
Yeah, we pay them to represent and read them.
I
Right.
think the bottom line is we elect our congressmen and our senators. That's their job. That's what they're supposed to do. I don't elect these trade guys that I don't know who they are because they're well beyond my pay grade, and I can't vote them out. If my congressman or senator should do something I don't like, or president, in theory, we vote them out. We don't. They answer to us. This guy working for some XYZ corporation, multinational corporation, Monsanto. I'm sure that they have a bunch of guys. I don't vote for them, so they don't. I can't call them out on the table. And then when it's a bad trade deal, they want to shirk the responsibility and say, well, we didn't really negotiate the deal. We just fast-tracked it. It's not us. It's sitting on.
Okay. Last year, over 151 Democratic representatives in the House and 27 Republicans have publicly announced their opposition to fast track. They don't want to give away their constitutional authority over trade. They don't want, you took my thunder here.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
They don't want their legislative rights undermined. Millions of citizens agree. We don't want over 600 unelected corporate trade representatives dictating our laws through trade agreements. This is undemocratic, it's sneaky, backdoor legislation.
One of the gentlemen said, the real fight starts when once, the deal is done and it's an up or down vote in the House and the Senate. But that's not true, right? So there were, as Lisa said, there have been 16 trade agreements using fast track. Anyone want to guess how many of those 16, after using fast track, passed and became law?
16.
All 16 of them, right? Like, this is the ball game. Like, if you fast track a trade agreement, it's going to pass. So this is when we have to act, is during fast track. So people who have been watching probably noticed that the TPA bill came out in the Senate today, and luckily it did not pass, 51-45. Glimmer of hope, glimmer of hope. 14 Democrats who actually have been in favor of TPP from all over the country voted against it because there are certain things they wanted to bundle to it. They used Senate rules and cloture rules and all sorts of things to say, if you don't bundle this with workers' rights and other things that we want, we're not going to pass it. So that's the good news. The bad news is everybody knows that's probably a bargaining chip, and that's probably a way so they can get a little bit more out of it before it ends up passing, because the people who are supportive of TPP, these 14 Senate Democrats, haven't changed their position. They just voted today in a certain way. So the Senate, luckily for us in New York, our two senators are on our team, right? They have seen all of this evidence, and they have said, this makes no sense, right? They have said repeatedly, this makes no sense, we shouldn't be doing it. But lots of pressure is still going to be on them over the next week or 2 weeks to, Matt, do you need something?
No.
Okay. In the next week or 2 weeks to say, to say, change your mind, right? I mean, President Obama apparently was bringing people on private Air Force One trips.
Yvette Clarke
to talk them up and say, hey, how about you get on board with this? I mean, these things are happening. So we definitely need to remember that even though our senators here in New York State, people that we have an influence on as constituents, could change their minds. The real battle in general, we think, and definitely in New York State, is in the House. This is a bipartisan issue. There's a lot for everybody to not like about it. And right now in the House, liberal Democrats and conservative Republicans are holding up the process, right? The only reason there's not a trade deal right now is because those two factions on both sides are saying this is not happening. They don't have the votes in the House. But they're not that many votes away if all of the undecided House people say, yes, I want to do it. And one of the supposedly undecided is this congressman, Congressman Lee Zeldin. Congressman Lee Zeldin has said he doesn't have an opinion. He wants to see what's happening. He has signed letters saying that he'd like to see the bill come up for vote, which tells you maybe he has decided. But he's still undecided, which is why we're having this event here tonight, which is why we are actually, I think, the #1 target in the state of New York as far as this I live in this congressional district. Hopefully a lot of you live in this congressional district. Our congressman is one of the deciding votes. And that's why we're here today and we have to take action.
Yes.
And have we invited Zeldin?
We have lobbied Zeldin. We had a group of 20 organizations, labor unions, progressive groups, libertarian groups, Tea Party group. We all came together and lobbied the congressman. We've tried to speak to him again. We've done a lot of work to speak with him, and we've got a lot of letters into his office, a lot of input to him. So we have engaged him. He is still supposedly undecided, though. He met with us when we lobbied him, told us how he was still researching it and how it was so interesting and how now that he's a congressman, foreign trade stuff is all new to him and he's really excited about it. And, so, yeah, he had a whole thing. But then the next morning, a letter came out from freshman representatives, including himself, urging Congress to pass a bill or urging Congress to bring up a bill, which is a bad sign.
I have a copy of that letter if you want.
Yeah.
Anybody wants to see it too.
But so there's a feeling that he's more decided towards voting for it than against it, and we've got to do some work with that. Now, the Senate's going to still be the first hurdle as far as we can tell. The Senate's still going to vote, and the Senate has a much easier path to voting it through. But then the House will be the second vote. That'll be the bigger vote, and that's why we need to take action here in Suffolk County.
We decided that there are 6 things. I mentioned them to you guys at the beginning of the meeting. We're going to kind of break up talking about them. The first main thing is call Zeldin, right? And, you know, this has been happening sort of around the country in congressional districts that are on the brink. We're going to flood, his office needs to be flooded with calls. So yes, there's that lovely sheet coming around. It's very red. It looks, you know, up for a fight. It's got his number. So call him yourself. You can also, like, get 5 friends, you know, 5 friends that will do your bidding. Get them to do that. That's one thing. There's some more fun stuff, too.
It's painless, too. I mean, I've called his office so many times, they know my voice.
Yeah.
They tell me my address before, you know, I finish speaking my name. But it literally takes a second. There's a few people in this room that have already done this.
And you get to talk to a person.
You talk to a person. A real person. You don't have to press 1. Is right around the corner on 39 Baker Street. We're going to do a call bank next week. If anybody's interested in coming down and helping us out and reaching out to registered voters and in Zeldin's district, we'd be happy to have you help. We'll walk you through what we...
Would that be?
Wednesday at 5:30. 39 Baker. There's a flyer in the back. If you sign your name on that, we will call and harass you to come hang out with us. Yeah, it's going around. It's going around. If you're interested.
And it's fun, right? This is like, we're all here, I think, because we want to talk about this stuff. So this is like your chance to just engage.
And you will hear back from him. I've heard back from him a couple of times. He's definitely, his letters are opposite of his position. He says he has no position. But his letters are definitely paving the way for him to approve fast track. He came up with a $60 billion surplus, trade surplus that I've never heard of. I can't find it anywhere. I just quoted $580 million, $1 billion deficit we've had. So it's very important. Another thing that came out of D.C. from our CWA members down in D.C. is Zeldin has wavered. He did sign that letter, but he's also saying he didn't think this would be such a hot button issue. And so that tells us that we're making progress.
And you're there to make it hotter.
And in the end, that's what we want to do. We want to make it represent us. I sat down, you know, Dan talked about the coalition, and I don't mean to steal the whole thing here again. Matt's over there. Greg Trainer and I actually lobbied him down in D.C. in the beginning of April, and had a 45-minute conversation with him, and he was basically trying to sell us on how he's pro-trade, but they don't know what the deal is, hasn't seen the deal. And he promised a meeting with us as soon as the TPA bill got back. Well, I've reached out to him numerous times, and I'm still waiting for that agreement. That tells you his position on it, unfortunately, in my opinion. This is a very cool event we're doing on May 27th. We're having a funeral procession, the death of U.S. jobs in our environment. I'll throw the environment in there. That wasn't really how we named it, but it's a big deal too. So, on Wednesday, there will be a funeral procession and service outside Congressman Lee Zeldin's office for U.S. middle-class jobs, safe food, clean air and water, and U.S. sovereignty. Killed by the Trans-Pacific Partnership and its fast-track passes, Congressman Zeldin's support for Trade Promotion Authority fast-track makes him an accessory to this. So at 5 o'clock, we're going to start on Main Street here in Patchogue. We're black. We're going to have a minister to give last rites of U.S. jobs and stuff like that. May 27th, 5 o'clock, and then we're going to do a procession to his office, and at 6 o'clock have services there.
And so, last couple things. This lovely lady has already bussed into the lawn signs. Take a lawn sign home. There's also petitions back there that you can grab and get your friends to sign on if you want. And Lisa, letters to the editor?
Yeah.
That's the last thing if you're really like into that.
I just want to emphasize again, if you did not sign in when you came in, please sign in so we can keep in touch with you. Letters to the editor. If you've written letters to Newsday, you know that it's pretty hard to get published there. But Suffolk County has a lot of little local newspapers. There's the Long Island Advance, Fire Island Tide, Long Island Business News, Fire News from Bellport. Then there are the Beacon Records. There's the Village Beacon Record. I don't know where that is. I don't know. North Shore, okay. Then there's the Port Times Record, Three Village, the Village Times, Smithtown. I don't know, does anybody else know what small papers are down here, what local papers?
Suffolk Times, News Review.
East End, whatever it is. I'm sure if you go into your local 7-Eleven or stationery store, you'll see, pick up one of those letters and write a letter to the editor. Those get published. They're dying for well-written letters to the editor, and you will get published. People read these little papers. I know I always do. Yeah. You know, write to Newsday, submit it to Newsday. Maybe it'll get in, maybe it won't. But we have to let people know. People have to know more about what's going on in their own backyard, because if this thing goes through, we're all going to suffer terribly.
The question was, is there an international corporation in Zeldin's district?
From this. I don't think so, but I need confirmation.
I don't know for sure. Do you want my theory? That'll make Zeldin like me even less? I mean, there was a lot of foreign money that got flooded into his campaign. And when I say foreign, I mean out of state, meaning out of our district. And they have big ties to big corporations. And you have to pay the tab for the people who brought you to the dance at some point. It's just me guessing. I don't know.
I would like to know, because I want to say, you know, you represent, what is it, 600,000 people? Therefore, there's not one corporation in your whole district that's going to benefit. And we're talking about domestic, but I need confirmation.
I'm guessing you would argue that that's not true in that places, like, I mean, obviously Walmart, but there are a lot of international foreign companies that have presences in Suffolk County. Well, not headquartered, but to benefit doesn't mean headquartered. I mean, I think that's...
Headquarters.
Right, but in the end, the TPP, unless you're a giant corporation, I don't see it. This will adversely affect from business. This is an anti-business thing. From middle business on down, will be devastated by this trade agreement.
Isn't this what makes up Suffolk County?
Yes.
This is the substance of Suffolk County, especially eastern Suffolk.
Yes, you don't have to sell me. Congressman Lee
That's
Zeldin,
been- that's all I-
Congressional First District.
That's what I wanted to say, is this is your district.
Right, I agree.
Okay, I just needed confirmation.
So I think there's
Now, on a positive aspect, the AFL-CIO issued a letter where every single major union in this country, every single one, I have a copy of that letter here too, has signed on to stop fast track of the TPP. Every single one. It's the first time ever that in the history of the AFL-CIO that all these unions agreed. Because unions don't always agree on everything, but on this one we do. So they haven't been funding any politicians until this is a dead deal. No congressman and no senator has gotten any money from any union under the AFL-CIO. There's some outside of that in this country. Now, on a positive aspect, the AFL-CIO issued a letter where every single major union in this country, every single one, I have a copy of that letter here too, has signed on to stop fast track of the TPP. Every single one. It's the first time ever that in the history of the AFL-CIO that all these unions agreed. Because unions don't always agree on everything, but on this one we do. So they haven't been funding any politicians until this is a dead deal. No congressman and no senator has gotten any money from any union under the AFL-CIO. There's some outside of that in this country.